Bipolar Disorder: Symptoms, Treatment, Medication, and Solutions. Written by Lucy Hiltz. Narrated by Lily Northfield. Chapter 1. Symptoms and Treatment Choices. What is bipolar disorder? Bipolar affective disorder is a brain disorder that triggers unusual shifts in mood, energy, activity levels, and the ability to perform day-to-day tasks. Signs of bipolar affective disorder are severe. They are different from the typical ups and downs that everybody goes through from time to time. Bipolar illness signs can lead to harmed relationships, poor job or school performance, and even suicide. But bipolar disorder can be treated, and those with this illness can lead full and efficient lives. Statistics. Bipolar is about a third as typical as depression, less than half as typical as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Diagnosed in about 2.6% of adults and 0 to 3% in youth. 48.8% receive treatment. While the rate of bipolar illness is the exact same amongst African Americans as it is among other Americans, African Americans are less likely to receive a health diagnosis and treatment. Ethnic minorities with bipolar illness are very likely to be misdiagnosed with schizophrenia, perform disorder, or antisocial behavior. APA 2012. Some factors have contributed to African Americans not getting help for bipolar illness and other mental illnesses. Some of the reasons are a mistrust of health professionals based in part on traditionally higher than average institutionalization of African Americans with mental disorder and on previous mistreatments, like such awful events as the Tuskegee syphilis research study. Cultural barriers between many doctors and their patients. Dependence on family and spiritual community rather than mental health specialists at the times of emotional distress. A tendency to discuss physical problems rather than talk about mental signs, or to mask symptoms with substance abuse or other health conditions. Socioeconomic factors which can restrict access to health and mental health care. Continued misunderstanding and stigma about mental illness. Symptoms of bipolar disorder. The people with bipolar illness experience intense emotional states that take place in unique periods called mood episodes. An excessively happy or overexcited state is called a manic episode, and a very miserable or helpless state is called a depressive episode. Sometimes, a mood episode includes signs of both mania and depression. This is called a blended state. Those with bipolar illness also could be explosive and irritable at the time of a state of mind episode. Severe changes in energy, activity, sleep, and conduct support these changes in state of mind. It's possible for a person with bipolar illness to experience a long-lasting period of unstable moods instead of discrete episodes of depression or mania. A person may be having an episode of bipolar illness. She has a number of manic or depressive signs for most of the day, almost every day, for at the very least 1 or 2 weeks. Sometimes symptoms are so severe that the individual can't operate normally at work, school, or home. Treatment options for bipolar affective disorder. There is no cure for bipolar affective disorder. The best treatments for bipolar affective disorder focus on unraveling the low and high in state of mind and energy. In addition, treatment works best when it is continuous rather than on and off. Treatment alternatives could include medication. Different kinds of medication can help. People respond to medications in different ways, so the kind of medication depends upon the patient. Sometimes an individual needs to try different medications to see which are best. Medications can cause side effects. Clients should always tell their physician about these issues. Aside from that, clients should not stop taking a medication without a physician's help. Stopping medication unexpectedly can be unsafe, and it can make bipolar symptoms even worse. Therapy. Different types of psychotherapy or talk therapy can help people with bipolar illness. Treatment can help them change their behavior and manage their lives. It can also help clients get along better with family and friends. There are several different psychotherapies that have appealing results. These include cognitive behavioral therapy to pay more attention to automated positive ideas as potential triggers for hypomania or mania, dialectical behavior therapy for improving emotional control, psychoeducational treatment to comprehend triggers and ways of handling the illness, family-focused treatment to enhance communication and lower intense emotional dispute, and interpersonal social rhythm therapy that emphasizes regular sleep and activity patterns. Therapy has a lot of promise as a way of preventing progression of bipolar disorder, delaying relapse, and enhancing functioning in between episodes. Other treatments. Some don't get a lot better with medication and therapy. These people might try electroconvulsive therapy or ECT. This is at times called shock therapy. ECT provides a fast shock that can at times correct problems in the brain. At times, people take natural supplements, such as St. John's wort or omega-3 fats. Talk with your medical professional before taking any supplement. Scientists aren't sure how these items influence those with bipolar disorder. Many talented and efficient people have successfully dealt with bipolar affective disorder, so a goal of treatment should not just be symptom decrease, but helping the individual to take advantage of their gifts and abilities. If you're interested in seeking help, locate a regional psychologist or psychological health expert in your area. Chapter 2. Sleep Deprivation. It's a recognized fact that sleep deprivation can precipitate mania in people with bipolar illness, and even one night of overall sleep deprivation can destabilize state of mind to the point where hospitalization is needed. Why does this happen, and what can you do about it? To comprehend the relationship between sleep and state of mind, you need to comprehend a little about chronobiology, from chronos, the Greek word for time, the science of physical rhythms and biological clocks. Nearly every living thing has an internal body clock. Even organisms as easy as germs have an internal timekeeping system. Humans are no different. An important concept in chronobiology is that of circadian rhythms. The term comes from the Latin words circa, suggesting around, and diem, suggesting day. It describes rhythms in the body that have a roughly 24-hour cycle, like the day-night cycle. Many physical functions follow a circadian rhythm. Body temperature cycles daily, as does blood pressure. It has been shown experimentally that our biological clock has a natural cycle of about 25 hours. It needs to be reset every day by environmental cues called Zeitgebers, a German word meaning time givers, that fine-tune our biological rhythm every morning to keep us in a 24-hour schedule. Even though our cycle can react to these everyday tweaks with no problem, this reset can move by only about a couple of hours at a time. If the Zeitgeber all of a sudden starts getting here some hours off schedule, as occurs with jet lag, it takes some days for the cycle to catch up. At the time of that time, we awaken and get sleepy at the wrong times and generally feel out of sorts. Eventually, our biological rhythm adjusts. The further we have taken a trip, the longer it takes, about 1 day for each hour of time change. What happens to people whose biological rhythms are really out of sync with their environment for more extended periods? English scientists set out to examine this question in the late 1990s. For this experiment, healthy volunteers went into speculative living quarters where they resided on a 30-hour day, 20 hours of wakefulness, 10 hours of sleep. Every several hours while awake, they took a 10-minute battery of psychological tests and ranked their mood. To decide on what time it was for the volunteers' body clock, they recorded their body temperature each few hours. For these volunteers, residing in a 30-hour cycle was the equivalent of taking a trip through 5 time zones every day. Their biological rhythms could never catch up. The scientists found that the volunteers' internal clocks entered and out of synchronization with their artificially imposed sleep-wake cycle. The more out of synchronization they were, the even worse their mood ended up being. It was the interaction of the two cycles that seemed to make the most distinction. They felt worse when their biological rhythm was telling them it wasn't time to get up yet, and their ecologically enforced sleep-wake cycle was telling them it was time to start, winding down for a long day. The more out of sync they were with their environment, the worse their state of mind ended up being. The scientists proposed that temporal alignment between the sleep-wake cycle and the internal body clock impacts self-assessment of state of mind in healthy subjects. Put more just, when our sleep-wake cycle and our internal clock are really out of synchronization, it has a deeply negative effect on our state of mind. Even reasonably small sleep disturbances can be destabilizing for bipolar patients. When about 200 bipolar subjects were followed for a year and their sleep and state of mind were evaluated each some months, those with fewer hours of sleep in the prior week had more manic symptoms. Those whose sleep patterns varied commonly from one night to the next had more depressive signs. Brain imaging research studies have revealed that sleep deprivation triggers interfered with communication within the mood control network of the brain in healthy individuals. That's noticeably comparable to that seen in persons with bipolar illness. Those healthy volunteers reported irritation and psychological vitality, symptoms not so different from those of mania. For bipolar illness clients, then, sleep deprivation acutely exacerbates issues in state-of-mind circuitry that are already there. Getting a better night's sleep means taking active steps to secure your body clock from disruptions in the environment by 1. Going to sleep and getting up at the same time each day, and 2. Limiting direct exposure to light at the wrong times. For most of us, that light originates from the ubiquitous screens of 21st century life. Television screens, computer screens, phone and tablet screens. The latter are particularly troublesome just because they're enriched with blue wavelengths. As far as your biological rhythm is concerned, playing a video game at 10 p.m. is like walking outside in an intense sunny early morning with a beautiful blue sky, essentially giving your brain a strong signal that it's time to wake up, not prepare for bed. Chapter 3. Dealing with Stress and Anxiety Disorder and Bipolar Illness. It's complex to deal with anxiety disorders in those with bipolar spectrum disorder. When Sander came to see me just recently, he wanted to assist with his fear of driving. He is scared to make left turns, so he checks and rechecks his distance from oncoming automobiles. If another vehicle comes too close or he slips on a wet road, he can't stop thinking about potential catastrophes. Sander has so many invasive ideas about this thought of events, he started to feel like something terrible actually happened. It's no surprise Sander is having these signs. Sander has obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, in addition to his bipolar I disorder. Intrusive thoughts and checking habits are really common symptoms for individuals with OCD. Sander typically keeps away from driving if he can because the worry and the monitoring are so burdensome, but at the same time he repents of his own fear and avoidance. Other people can in some case make the embarrassment worse. Friends and family, even therapists, can motivate people to push past the anxiety. They discuss how they faced their fears and survived. I've made this mistake as well. This encouragement is well meant. However, the net result is that the people can feel just as if they're weak, as if they're not strong enough to put mind over matter. But the issue is not personal weakness or lack of character. Managing anxiety conditions in the context of bipolar disorder is usually difficult and more complicated. Basic approaches to treating anxiety conditions can require a lot of adjustment to be efficient in people who also have bipolar affective disorder. The modern treatment for OCD is direct exposure and response avoidance, E&RP, a treatment which also includes directly facing fears. In E&RP treatment, clients are met or are exposed to a circumstance that makes them restless, and they are exposed to the emotions that accompany that feared circumstance. At the time of and after the direct exposure part of the treatment, clients are stopped from carrying out the rituals or behaviors that they use to lower anxiety, like avoidance, reassurance looking for, or checking. E&RP works, in part, because people gain experience in regulating their own emotional responses and actions as they consistently approach the situation they fear. In the process, they develop a sense of mastery of the circumstances and their own emotions. But bipolar illness could make complex the response to E&RP. Bipolar illness can disrupt the capability to regulate feelings as people face their fears. The initial intense anxiety response to a fearful circumstance could be really strong. Individuals with bipolar disorder may get stuck in the anxiety and may not be able to minimize the emotional intensity. They can't shift from the feeling to view the situation from a new perspective. The anxiety activates a waterfall of negative thoughts, emotions, and images. This waterfall of negative psychological experiences is what happens to Sander. His mind moves quickly from ideas about a possible car crash to images of a horrifying tragedy. He imagines terrible repercussions. He feels parodic but grasping panic whenever the possible collision crosses his mind. These negative images, thoughts, and feelings can happen in the majority of people with OCD when they approach a scenario that they fear. But learn how to decrease the cascade of negative feelings can be harder for individuals with bipolar affective disorder. Why is slowing down the emotional reactions more difficult? Bipolar disorder can impact underlying cognitive procedures that help manage feeling. These cognitive procedures become part of executive performance, a group of processes involved in controlling attention and organizing and connecting information. Executive functioning is important for emotion regulation. An example would be the following. When people shift from something disturbing, they are better able to decrease their intensity of their feelings. When they break a problem down into tinier parts, they can find it easier to sort out how to deal with each part. And when they lower their strength of negative emotions, they're better able to move perspective and access the information they need to resolve problems. Individuals usually make these shifts in attention and perspective without being aware they are doing so. They take their executive functioning for granted. However, individuals with bipolar affective disorder have more trouble engaging executive functioning. For example, people with bipolar illnesses often have trouble moving attention. They get stuck on a feeling. When they are manic, they may be able to make many connections amongst different ideas. Though when they are depressed, this sort of connection is very challenging. It's not impossible, but it can be much, much harder. These problems in emotion regulation and executive function could be connected to differences in the connections between parts of the brain. New research suggests that bipolar disorder affects the communication between parts of the brains involved in experiencing feelings and parts of the brain that are associated with the procedures used to manage these emotions. These differences in brain function can mean that managing disturbing feelings is more difficult. So when people with bipolar illness and anxiety disorder have a hard time managing anxiety, it doesn't mean they are weak. It means they don't have the same tools at their disposal to manage these highly emotional circumstances. Some of the underlying cognitive procedures do not work the same way. New approaches are needed. In the next article, we will talk about possible approaches that can help people support their ability to face their fears. These include approaches drawn from inspirational talking to, approval and dedication treatment, and schema therapy and other approaches. We will learn how Xander started to drive more regularly. Chapter 4. Cyclothymic Disorder. Cyclothymic disorder, or cyclothymia, is a kind of bipolar affective disorder identified by unique episodes of hypomanic symptoms, raised state of mind and bliss, and depressive signs over a period at the very least 2 years. The state of mind variations are not adequate in number, severity, or period to meet the full requirements for hypomanic or depressive episode. They exist more than 50% of the time, and no more than 2 months elapse without signs. Hypomania includes periods of elevated state of mind, bliss, and enjoyment, but does not detach an individual from reality. An individual with cyclothymia experiences symptoms of hypomania, but not full-blown manic episodes. Hypomania could feel good to the individual who experiences it and might cause boosted functioning and performance. Therefore, even when family and friends learn how to recognize the mood swings as a possible bipolar disorder, the person could deny that a problem exists. Without correct treatment, though, symptoms can get worse. Approximately 0.4% to 1% of people will experience cyclothymia in their life. The disorder typically begins in teenage years or their early adult years, and it is long-lasting. There's a 15% to 50% risk that a person with cyclothymic disorder will go on to develop bipolar I or bipolar II disorder. Though many people do recover from cyclothymia and do experience future signs of hypomania or depression, cyclothymic disorder is similarly typical in males and females. It might occur with substance use disorder or anxiety disorder. Signs. According to the DSM-5, cyclothymic disorder appears when, for at the very least 2 years, 1 year for children and teenagers, an individual displays periods of hypomanic signs and periods of depressive symptoms if the state of mind disturbances don't meet requirements for hypomanic or major depressive episode. The mood fluctuations are present more than half of the time, and the individual is never symptom-free for more than 2 consecutive months. The signs are not the outcome of a health condition or substance use. The condition usually has a perilous start. Symptoms and signs of hypomania is cataloged by the DSM-5. A distinct period of abnormally and persistently raised extensive or irritable state of mind. An increase in goal-directed activity, sexually, socially, at work or at school. Inflated self-esteem or grandiosity. Decreased need for sleep. Talkativeness. Racing ideas leaping from one to another. Distractibility. Failure to focus, excessive participation in activities that have a high potential for unpleasant consequences, such as purchasing sprees, sexual indiscretions. The episode represents a distinct change in functioning, and the changes in mood and behavior are discernible by others. Depressive symptoms include consistent unhappiness, fatigue or apathy, extreme sleepiness, or, alternatively, failure to sleep, anorexia nervosa, and weight loss or overindulging in weight gain, loss of self-confidence, feelings of worthlessness, despondence, and/or guilt, trouble focusing, recalling, or making decisions, withdrawal from good friends, withdrawal from activities that were once taken pleasure in, relentless ideas of death. It is not unusual for people with cyclothymic disorder to also have medical diagnosis of substance-related conditions and sleep conditions. Kids with cyclothymic disorder are also more likely to have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder than other pediatric patients. Causes. The reason for cyclothymic disorder is unidentified. Hypomanic periods are energizing and can result in productivity for some people, while for others these periods can trigger impulsive and callous behavior, which can harm relationships. Just because hypomania feels good, those with cyclothymia could not seek treatment. Existing scientific evidence suggests there is no reason for bipolar affective disorders. Rather, many elements act together to produce these conditions. It is known, however, that significant depressive disorder, bipolar I disorder, and bipolar II disorder are more typical amongst close biological family members of people with cyclothymic disorder. Yet, both genes and ecological elements contribute in bipolar affective disorder. Treatment. Treatment for cyclothymia is similar to treatment for bipolar I disorder and bipolar II disorder. Level of treatment depends on the severity of signs. Many people with bipolar illness, even the most severe forms, can achieve significant stabilization of their signs with proper treatment. And even in the most serious cases, bipolar disorders are highly treatable conditions. The earlier treatment begins, the greater the possibility of lowering the seriousness and frequency of manic and depressive episodes. Just because bipolar affective disorders are long-lasting conditions, treatment is also lifelong and aimed not just at dealing with signs when they occur, but also at stopping reoccurrence of symptoms. Most people with bipolar affective disorders can achieve considerable stabilization of their mood swings and associated signs. The most efficient strategy integrates medication and psychological therapy. In addition, patients are typically instructed to keep a chart of day-to-day state-of-mind signs, treatments, sleep patterns, and life events. Such tracking has been revealed to help clients and their families to better comprehend and manage the disease. State-of-mind changes can usually be identified in time to stop a full-blown episode. Even when there are no breaks in treatment, mood changes can occur and should be reported instantly to the physician, who might make modifications to the treatment plan. Medications. While primary care physicians who don't specialize in psychiatry could prescribe psychotropic medications, it is recommended that individuals with bipolar affective disorder see a psychiatrist for treatment. Several kinds of medication are frequently used to treat bipolar illness. Mood stabilizers are typically recommended to manage manic episodes. Lithium is perhaps the best-known mood stabilizer. The first mood-stabilizing medication approved by the USA Food and Drug Administration, FDA, for treatment of mania. It is typically really effective in controlling mania and stopping the reoccurrence of both manic and depressive episodes. Other kinds of mood stabilizers include the anticonvulsants lamotrigine, Lamical, valeric acid, Depakine, Devilpromix sodium, Depakote, and carbamazepine, Tretadol, and others. Valproate was FDA approved in 1995 for the treatment of mania. Anticonvulsant medications might be integrated with lithium or with each other for maximum influence. Other medications are added when needed, normally for much shorter periods to treat episodes of mania or depression. At times, treatment with antidepressants results in mood switching, prompting a manic or hypomanic episode or rapid cycling. Mood-stabilizing medications normally are required alone or in mix with antidepressants to secure against such a switch. Children and teenagers with bipolar affective disorder generally are treated with lithium, but valproate and carbamazepine are also used. Women with bipolar illness who wish to conceive or who conceive face special obstacles due to possible results of mood-supporting medications on the developing fetus and the nursing baby. An experienced clinician can help such women weigh the benefits and danger of all readily available treatment options. Antipsychotic medications are often used to help control manic and depressive signs in bipolar disorder, and some help to stabilize state of mind also. Antipsychotic drugs include olanzapine, Zyprexa, quetiapine, Zyrquil, and Resortodon, Resveradol, among others. If sleeping disorders is a problem, a high-potency benzodiazepine medication like clonazepam or lorazepam might be valuable. Yet because these medications could be habit-forming, they're best recommended short-term. Other kinds of sedative medications, such as zolpidem, are in some cases used instead. Omega-3 fatty acids found in fish oil are under research study for their effectiveness alone or when contributed to traditional medications for long-term treatment of bipolar disorder. Effective management of cyclothymia can involve changes to the treatment plan at numerous times over the course of disease. Any changes in type or dose of medication should be made under the guidance of a psychiatrist. To keep away from negative reactions, patients should tell the psychiatrist about all other prescription drugs, over-the-counter medications, or natural supplements they could be taking. People with bipolar affective disorder, particularly those with rapid state-of-mind cycling, usually have irregular thyroid gland function because way too much or too little thyroid hormone alone can cause state-of-mind and energy changes. Thyroid levels are usually carefully kept track of by a doctor. Lithium treatment could trigger low thyroid levels in some people, resulting in the need for thyroid supplementation. All medications have side effects. Depending upon the medication, adverse effects could include weight gain, queasiness, tremors, decreased sexual desire, anxiety, loss of hair, movement problems, or dry mouth. Getting the right balance of treatment benefits could require a physician-monitored modification in dose or kind of medication. Medication ought to not be changed or stopped without the psychiatrist's guidance. Psychiatric therapy. Research studies have recorded that some sorts of psychotherapy provided to patients and their families can result in increased mood stabilization, less hospitalizations, and improved functioning in several areas. Psychotherapeutic interventions frequently used for bipolar disorder are cognitive behavior therapy, psychoeducation, family treatment, and social rhythm therapy, IPSRT. IPSRT stresses the importance of developing steady day-to-day patterns of sleeping and waking, as prolonged wakefulness is a recognized trigger for manic episodes. A licensed psychologist, social worker, or therapist normally offers such therapies and usually works in concert with the psychiatrist to monitor patient progress. Cognitive behavior therapy, CBT, helps individuals with bipolar illness learn how to change inappropriate or negative idea patterns and habits connected with the illness. Psychoeducation involves teaching people with bipolar illness about the condition and its treatment, and how to recognize signs of regression so that early intervention can be sought before a full-blown episode occurs. Psychoeducation is also often practical for family members. Household therapy helps in reducing the level of family distress that might contribute to or result from the ill person's symptoms. Interpersonal and social rhythm therapy helps people with bipolar affective disorder, both to enhance relationships and to regulate daily regimens. Keeping a day-to-day routine and sleep schedule can help secure against manic episodes. Chapter 5. Bipolar disorder is genetic. Bipolar disorder is typically considered a condition that reflects hereditary impact. One twin study reveals just how hereditary the disorder is. If one twin develops bipolar disorder, the possibility of the other twin developing the condition is 85 to 89%. The high likelihood of double-triple comes not from the environment the twins populated together while they were developing, but from the genes they share, reports a team of British and Canadian detectives. Only 15% of circumstances of bipolar affective disorder can be attributed to elements particular to individuals or to their special life experiences outside the family of origin. What's more, the hereditary loading for bipolar disorder is limited to liability to mania. Surprisingly, the study also shows that unipolar sadness isn't simply a less severe form of bipolar affective disorder. Only 10% of twins with unipolar major sadness had a co-twin with bipolar sadness. Nevertheless, there's some hereditary overlap. Susceptibility to bipolar affective disorder seems to make victims prone to unipolar depression as well. 50% of the co-twins with bipolar affective disorder also had unipolar disorder. Chapter 6. A nutrient formula for bipolar disorder. Complementary and Alternative Treatments of Bipolar Disorder. This is the third in a series of posts on bipolar illness. The first post provided a short summary of traditional treatment approaches. The second post briefly reviewed the evidence for vitamins and amino acids as treatments of bipolar illness. That post is offered as an introductory, proprietary nutrient formula that may lower signs of bipolar disorder in many cases. While the formula has not been strongly substantiated by research findings, I've chosen to write something about this nutrition formula because I really believe it may become a promising future treatment of bipolar affective disorder. Initial findings. An exclusive 36-ingredient formula of minerals and vitamins may significantly reduce symptoms of mania, depressed state of mind, and psychosis in bipolar clients when taken alone or used together with a state of mind stabilizer. Kaplan, 2001. Researchers actually believe the formula works by fixing innate metabolic errors that lead to bipolar-like signs in genetically predisposed people when certain micronutrients lack the diet plan. In one series, 11 bipolar patients who completed a 6-month procedure had the ability to reduce their traditional mood stabilizers by half while enhancing medically. In another case series, 13 out of 19 bipolar patients who continued on the nutrient formula stayed steady after ceasing traditional mood stabilizers. Simons, 2003. Some clients stopped taking the formula because of nausea and diarrhea, and 3 patients resumed traditional mood stabilizers because of repeating manic signs. Big prospective, randomized, placebo-controlled research studies are needed. The evidence for this nutrient formula should be considered preliminary, pending the results of large, prospective, placebo-controlled studies in individuals with different types of bipolar illness. More particularly, added research studies are needed to determine if the nutrition formula is an efficient standalone treatment, to determine the most efficacious mix of nutrients, and to determine optimal dosing strategies for different phases of bipolar health problem. In view of reports of security problems when the nutrition formula is taken together with the state of mind stabilizer, future research studies also need to identify if the nutrient formula can be safely used as an add-on treatment of bipolar disorder. Chapter 7. What you can do about postpartum bipolar affective disorder. There is progressively more discussion these days about postpartum depression. This is good news. Just because creating a greater understanding through informed and thoughtful discussion reduces the preconception about new mothers seeking mental health treatment. What remains less understood is postpartum bipolar affective disorder. This genetically based mood disorder is typically misdiagnosed and mistreated. When signs of bipolar begin during pregnancy or after giving birth, the results can be especially devastating. The term peripartum is formally used for both during and after pregnancy, but here I'm going to use postpartum simply because it tends to be more familiar. Postpartum bipolar disorder is marked by the exact same symptoms of bipolar that anyone else with the disorder would experience, starting with either mania or sadness. Women with postpartum bipolar disorder can experience severe upswings that include feelings of euphoria, grand self-image, high irritability and agitation, reduced desire to sleep, racing thoughts, impulsive and usually harmful behaviors, or go through periods of deep sadness, which can include emotions of despondence and self-destructive ideas or actions. And like any other kind of bipolar beginning, postpartum bipolar illness usually goes unidentified and untreated for too long. It is essential to recall that bipolar illness, in general, is a mental disorder that has genetic and neurological structures. That means bipolar is genetic and is essentially coded in the person's DNA. As the brain develops, these hereditary factors impact how the brain manages psychological regulation, resulting in mood swings that can last for several days. Typically, the first signs of bipolar affective disorder occur during teenage years. But it's also not unusual for symptoms to occur when significant hormonal changes happen during pregnancy or after childbirth. In addition to these changes, the more normal concerns of stress, excitement, and pain related to pregnancy and giving birth can get worse a bipolar condition, typically carrying underlying symptoms of depression or mania to the emotional surface. The issues with identifying postpartum bipolar illness. Signs of postpartum bipolar disorder do not always begin right away. Many women begin showing mood swings in the days or weeks after delivery. This can make an accurate analysis of bipolar much more challenging, since either the new mom or the psychological health expert may not instantly connect these signs to postpartum triggers for bipolar illness. Along with typical difficulties in determining postpartum bipolar, many women go neglected. This is certainly damaging to the new mom, but may also affect the child both before and after birth and other family members. Usually, women are afraid of exposing their signs to others, including their doctors. If depressed, they can fear being roughly judged by others for not being more than happy or productive enough at the time of this unique time in life for them. Or they themselves could wonder if they're flawed as mothers, not feeling enough love for their infants. If manic, they can become hyperactive or irritable and restless. Most in this state could also snap in uncharacteristic anger. In the absolute worst form of the disorder, some women develop psychotic signs, including, but not limited to, hallucinations and delusional or paranoid ideas. What is most alarming about bipolar is the very high rate of suicide associated with the disorder. Women with postpartum bipolar illness will usually hide suicidal ideas, fearing what might happen to them or that somebody may take their babies from them. Nevertheless, the bottom line is the following. No one is at fault for having bipolar disorder, but with knowledge, support, and good treatment, people can live effectively with the disorder throughout their lives while decreasing the risk that come with it. What you can do about postpartum bipolar. It's most critical to get professional care as soon as possible, so here are several essential ideas if you think you have postpartum bipolar, or somebody you know might have it. First, if there's any personal or family history of mood swings or any serious mental illness for that matter, there's a much greater chance for postpartum bipolar illness. This is great info to share with your physician, including your OB/GYN or a psychiatrist. If you're already in treatment for bipolar, talk about all medication concerns with your medical professionals before getting pregnant, if possible. If you find you're pregnant while in treatment, don't just stop medications without first talking with a prescribing physician and evaluating all alternatives toward maintaining good mental health. And this should happen as quickly as possible since neglected mood swings can't only impact the mom's health, but fetal development also. Also, if you're in treatment for depression and you're either not enhancing as expected or being more agitated and irritable on medication, you may have the first signs of bipolar disorder. Again, bring this to your medical professional's attention right away. Certain antidepressant medications can actually induce mania in people who have an underlying bipolar disorder. If you really believe you're experiencing signs at all, it can be frightening to discuss the emotions of a possible bipolar disorder with anybody, which includes medical professionals and other health providers. But again, know that it's not your fault for feeling that way. Many women have told me that getting treatment for postpartum bipolar disorder provided them better opportunities for good health for themselves and their loved ones. Having bipolar doesn't mean you're a bad mother. Instead, reaching out for care can save you from many unpleasant and possibly damaging moments. And if you really love someone who might have postpartum bipolar disorder, know that you can end up being an important supportive member of her care team. Offering some basic facts about postpartum bipolar, together with support that she's not alone, may be just what she needs to progress with correct treatment. Chapter 8. Brain Size and Bipolar Disorder. When it comes to those with schizophrenia, the hippocampus, a part of the brain associated with memory and feeling, tends to shrink. Scientists have wondered whether this is also the case in mood disorders. Now, a group led by NARSAD 2016, young detective Bo Chow, Ph.D., at the University of Texas Health Center at Houston, have taken a much closer look at the hippocampus and those with a state of mind conditions, comparing the size of particular parts of the brain structure in different groups of clients. Their analysis has exposed that in those with bipolar affective disorder, certain parts of the hippocampus are tinier than they are in both those with major depressive disorder and in people without mood conditions. The discoveries were released on January 24th in the journal Molecular Psychiatry. Jair Soares, MD, Ph.D., a 1997 and 1999 young investigator and 2002 independent private investigator at University of Texas Health Science Center, was the senior author of the paper. Although it is not yet known why these brain areas are littler in people with bipolar disorder, the discoveries call scientists' attention to particular parts of the hippocampus that may be involved in patients' signs. With more research study, these areas might end up being targets of new treatments or be used to keep an eye on clients' response to treatment. Chow and Soares and their colleagues used an advanced technique called division in magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, to imagine the brains of studied subjects with enough details to measure the volume of well-defined areas or subfields within each of the brain's two hippocampi, each of the brain's 2 hemispheres has a hippocampus. Researchers think that these subfields in the hippocampus might be accountable for different brain functions. Comparing the brains of 152 healthy controls to those of 133 those with bipolar affective disorder and 86 people with major depressive disorder, the scientists found that certain areas, particularly the corona amornis, area 4, the granule cell layer, the molecular layer, and the tail, were smallest in those with bipolar I disorder than they were in other groups. The decrease in size were most serious amongst patients with bipolar I disorder, a form of the disorder that involves more extreme manic episodes than bipolar II disorder. Certain parts were decreased most drastically in people who had experienced the most manic episodes. Chapter 9. Why are there more of those with bipolar affective disorder in the United States? According to a new study talked about in Health.com, about 2.4% of people around the globe have had a diagnosis of bipolar disorder at some time in their lifetime. According to the initially extensive global figures on the topic, the United States has the greatest lifetime rate of bipolar disorder at 4.4%, and India the most affordable, with 0.1%. Bipolar illness has a strong hereditary component. Depending on which research studies you look at, the genes account for wherever from 40% to 60% of the vulnerability. While that appears like a high number, it also means 40 to 60% of the risk of developing the disorder regardless of having the genes comes from the environment. Only 40 to 60% of every set of identical twins will develop the disorder. So what is it that could be activating this high rate of bipolar illness in the USA? Let's look at this issue from the macro to the micro levels. On a socioeconomic macro level, the U.S. is the biggest and most industrialized Western society, has a rather exaggerated culture. First off, we have the biggest gap between wealthy and the poor, so the financial tensions on a very large part of the population are greater than in other Western societies. This translates into psychological tension, more drug abuse, poor quality nutrition, and fragmentation of the family. Early kidhood rearing is more likely to be a daycare center, which is naturally unsteady. People change centers or caregivers change in a center and impersonal. There's a greater likelihood of bullying and minimized supervision. The result of all this is impaired social bonding in those that are particularly susceptible. The poor nutrition results in impaired metabolic performance. Now we enjoy the micro level, trouble making or breaking down neurotransmitters, more likely infection and swelling, which can change brain chemistry. This is a basic overview, and many books could easily be written about this subject. In fact, I have written 3 books myself on these factors. Suffice it to say that the most vulnerable among us pay the cost for our imbalanced society. Included in that group are the young, the ill, the genetically vulnerable, and the seniors. Chapter 10. How is the cerebellum linked to bipolar illness? A study released on January 6, 2015, from the University of Iowa, UI, has connected abnormalities of the cerebellum, distinctions in cerebral white matter, and bipolar affective disorder. The study, Brain Problems in Bipolar Illness, discovered by quantitative TP mapping, was released in the diary Molecular Psychiatry. Casey Johnson, Ph.D., and University of Iowa postdoctoral research fellow, was the first author on the study. John Wyme, M.D., Ph.D., and UI professor of psychiatry, was the senior research study author. For this revolutionary research study, University of Iowa scientists used a new MIR method called quantitative T1-RHO mapping, which can supply rapid high-resolution images of the whole brain. This is the first time that neuroscientific scientists have used T1-RHO imaging to investigate psychiatric disease. This new brain imaging strategy is a development. T1-RHO MRI scans are highly sensitive to specific byproducts of cellular metabolic process, consisting of levels of glucose and level of acidity that other brain imaging techniques are not able to map in high resolution. Traditional imaging tools are usually slow, low resolution, and require that researchers recognize what brain regions they want to focus on at the beginning of the study. Whatever the cerebellum is doing, it's doing a great deal of it. This morning, I had a chance to speak on the phone with Casey Johnson and share my enjoyment about the new UI study. My obsession with the cerebellum was passed on to me by my dad, Richard Berglund, MD, who is a neurosurgeon, neuroscientist, and author of The Fabric of Mind, Viking. Later in his life, my dad became persuaded the neuroscientist and physician were ignoring the psychological and cognitive role of the cerebellum. The cerebellum is only 10% of brain volume, but holds over 50% of your brain's overall neurons. Based upon this fact, when I was writing The Athlete's Way, St. Martin's Press, my dad would usually say to me, "Whatever the cerebellum is doing, it is doing a lot of it." This saying ended up being a mantra for me. Unfortunately, as a neuroscientific researcher in the late 20th century, the limitations of available brain imaging innovation at the time made it unrealistic for my dad to prove any of his educated guesses about the cerebellum in his lab. When my father died in 2007, I made a vow to act on his inklings about the cerebellum and keep my antenna up for advances in our comprehension of the cerebellum brought on by the introduction of innovation and better brain imaging methods. Needless to say, this is one reason that I'm so ecstatic about this new study in innovative MRI technique. How did the UI scientist find the link between bipolar affective disorder and the cerebellum? On the phone this morning, Casey Johnson repeated the bottom lines of his new study. Plainly, the high-resolution T1 RHO imaging gave the researchers a new way to look at whole brain changes as they associate with bipolar affective disorder. Remarkably, when Johnson set out to compare 15 clients with bipolar affective disorder and 25 control subjects matched for age and gender using T1 RHO imaging, they weren't expecting to see the cerebellum light up. As Johnson defines in a press release, our study was essentially exploratory. We didn't know what we would find, he adds. Many bipolar affective disorder research has found distinctions in the frontal region of the brain. We found focal differences in the cerebellum, which is an area that hasn't actually been highlighted in the bipolar literature before. Though, when Johnson and his coworkers were comparing the brain imaging of controls without bipolar disorder, they found that in patients affected by bipolar affective disorder, that the MRI signal was elevated in both the cerebral white matter and in the cerebellum. After seeing the cerebellum illuminate on their MRI scans, Johnson and Weemy started digging deeper into the clinical literature on bipolar illness. They were able to patch together prior research which suggests that the cerebellum might function abnormally in bipolar illness and that lithium may potentially target the cerebellum and change cerebellar, of or pertaining to the cerebellum, glucose levels. Previous studies have connected abnormal cell metabolic process with bipolar illness, but investigating metabolic abnormalities with the brain has been limited by primary brain imaging technology. The UI researchers hypothesized that the raised signal could be caused by either a reduction in pH or a decrease in glucose concentration. As I was doing more research on the link between the cerebellum and bipolar illness this afternoon, I stumbled upon a study from November 2014 that compared the cerebellum volume in clients with schizophrenia and bipolar illness. The research was led by Jocelyn Hanou, INSERM, Créteil, France. The goal of the study was to compare cerebellum volume between patients with bipolar affective disorder, clients with schizophrenia, and healthy controls. Besides, the scientists looked at the influence of psychotic features on the cerebellum size in patients with bipolar disorder. The study, Cerebellum Volume in Schizophrenia and Bipolar I Disorder, with and without psychotic functions, was published in the November 2014 journal Acta Psychiatrica Scandinavia. Hanou and colleagues found that bilateral cerebral cortical volumes were smaller in patients with schizophrenia compared to clients with bipolar I disorder and healthy controls. Remarkably, they also found no distinct distinction in cerebral volume between bipolar clients with and without psychotic functions. The group concluded that a decrease in cerebral volume specifies to schizophrenia, but that cerebral irregularities in individuals with bipolar illness seem more subtle than simply a reduction in cerebral volume. In a December 2014 interview, Hanou said, "Moreover, a growing body of proof, primarily using diffusion-weighted imaging, suggests that bipolar illness is associated with white matter irregularities. Therefore, future microstructural evaluation of the cerebral white matter using diffusion MRI rather than the assessment of the cerebral white matter volume might be handy to comprehend participation of a cerebral dysfunction in bipolar affective disorder." It is serendipitous that just a month after Jocelyn Hanou made these comments, the researchers at University of Iowa were able to use a new brain imaging innovation to start to evaluate more subtle ways in which the cerebellum may be associated with bipolar illness. This is a very interesting time for researchers everywhere in the world who are checking out the role of the cerebellum in cognitive function, psychological control, psychiatric health problem. Conclusion is acquiring a better understanding of the cerebellum the next frontier for neuroscience in the early 21st century? The University of Iowa researchers hope that new insights provided by the T1 RHO imaging will cause a better grasp of specific brain abnormalities that underlie bipolar illness. Johnson and Weemy are positive that these discoveries may cause more fine-tuned methods of detecting and treating bipolar illness. In a press release, Casey Johnson concludes, "Our paper with this new technique begins to bring all these pieces of proof together for the first time." Although lithium can be an efficient mood stabilizer for people with bipolar illness, it has a laundry list of undesirable bad side effects. Senior author John Weemy concluded, "If lithium's influence in the cerebellum is the crucial to its efficiency as a mood stabilizer, then a more targeted treatment that triggers the exact same change in the cerebellum without impacting other systems may be a better treatment for patients with bipolar affective disorder." This has been Bipolar Disorder Symptoms, Treatment, Medication, and Solutions, written by Lucy Hiltz, narrated by Lily Northfield. Copyright 2020 by Lucy Hiltz. Production copyright by Lucy Hiltz.